They all stopped talking. Forks froze mid-air. Champagne glasses quivered in mid-toast. Eyes widened across the ballroom. The CEO of Monarch & Wells, tall, sharp, and known for his quiet authority, was now kneeling. Not in pain, not by force, but by choice. And he was kneeling before the janitor. There she stood, unsure if she should move, breathe, or even blink. Her simple dress whispered grace, her eyes held disbelief, and her hands, those hands that once scrubbed floors, now trembled at the center of a silent storm. "Will you marry me?" he asked. Those who had mocked her barely a month ago? They couldn't speak. Their silence was louder than applause. But how did we get here? What would make a man with the world at his feet kneel before a woman most never even noticed? Let me ask you something. Have you ever been talked down to like you didn't matter? Been overlooked, not because you lacked talent, but because you lacked the right title or the right shoes? Have you ever walked into a room where people acted like you were invisible, even while you cleaned up their mess? If yes, this story is for you. You're about to hear the journey of a young woman who wore silence like armor and kindness like a crown. She was laughed at, ignored, ridiculed by the very people who would one day whisper her name in awe. They thought they had her figured out, but they didn't know the fire she carried quietly behind her smile. Stay with me, because what happened next wasn't just surprising, it shifted the power dynamic of an entire room. This is a story of strength where no one thought to look. A story that proves that sometimes the most overlooked person in the building is the one carrying the brightest light. Before we move forward, let's ground this moment with something many of us need, a short prayer for anyone who has ever felt small in a world that only claps for the loud. Dear God, for every viewer who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or pushed aside, remind them of their worth. Remind them that their kindness is strength, not weakness. Restore the fire behind their dreams, and let this story awaken the belief that they too have purpose stitched into their journey. Lift their spirits, quiet their fears, and guide them toward the moment where they will finally rise. Amen. If you've ever felt overlooked or like your light was pushed into a corner, do me a favor. Tap the like button, subscribe, and comment "I still believe." You never know who might need to see a story like this today. Now, let's step into a world where quiet hearts carry powerful stories. Arlena Moore was not born into luxury, spotlight, or applause. She didn't enter Monarch & Wells through polished glass doors with a degree tucked under her arm. She came through the staff entrance before sunrise, head down, hands steady, spirit steady. Most employees never remembered her name. Some didn't bother to look her way. She wasn't the woman in the tailored suit or the bold heels. She was the one cleaning up after the meetings no one thanked her for. But what no one knew, what absolutely no one imagined, was that the same woman, wiping down their tables, had once dreamed of shaping the fashion world. She had sketches that could have made heads turn, ideas that could have changed runways. But life altered her path, and responsibility came knocking long before opportunity did. Still, she carried her dream quietly, like a small flame cupped between her hands, determined not to let the world blow it out. People saw her uniform. They saw her job. They saw a role, not a person. But one man would look at her and see everything they missed. One moment, unexpected and unforgettable, would flip the judgment of an entire building upside down. And it all began long before that knee touched the floor. Long before anyone knew her name, Arlena Moore was already a quiet force. She moved through the world like a whisper, present, necessary, but often ignored. Not because she lacked value, but because people rarely pay attention to those who make their comfort look effortless. She worked as a janitor at Monarch & Wells, a towering firm known for sharp suits, glass walls, and tight deadlines. Her shift started before the first coffee pot brewed. She slipped in while the city's heartbeat was still slow, before traffic built, before the elevators pinged with hurried feet. Each morning, she would unlock her supply closet like it was sacred. Her mop, her gloves, her cart, those were the tools she used not just to clean but to protect. Her work was silent armor. She took pride in leaving each room better than she found it, even if no one said thank you. They didn't see her, but that was okay. She wasn't doing it for them. Arlena didn't choose this life. It chose her. Years earlier, she was a fashion student, top of her class. Her notebooks overflowed with design sketches, bold lines, soft drapes, and colors that told entire stories. She had ambition, a style of her own, and a growing reputation for creating beauty out of the unexpected. But all of that paused the day her phone rang and her world stopped. A car crash. Both parents gone. She was barely 20, standing at the edge of a dream, when reality yanked her back. She became guardian to 2 younger siblings, Nyla, barely 5, and Dorian, just a toddler. Suddenly, rent mattered more than runways, formula cost more than fabric, and homework replaced hemlines. No one teaches you how to survive when grief comes knocking and responsibility shows up in its shadow. So, she did what strong people do. She adapted. She quit school. She found a job. She tucked her sketchbooks under her bed, behind cleaning supplies and spare socks. And every night, when her brother and sister were asleep, she'd open those pages like a window into another life. She never threw them out, because even if she couldn't chase her dream, she refused to let it die. The world saw her as a cleaner. She saw herself as a protector. While her peers partied or traveled, Arlena memorized bus schedules and grocery store discounts. Her hands were always working, scrubbing, folding, packing school lunches, taping spelling words to the fridge. Her apartment was small but warm. Every corner had purpose. Her siblings never went to bed hungry, never missed a field trip. They didn't know what brand their clothes were, but they always smelled of lavender and their shoes were always laced tight. She gave them stability. She gave them safety. She gave them everything she never had time to grieve losing. There were nights she'd sit in silence once the chores were done. The apartment dim, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. Her fingers would trace old sketch lines. She'd whisper ideas aloud just to hear her own voice. No one asked about her day. No one wanted to hear her opinions on design lines or fabric movement. She was a listener, a fixer, a quiet force holding a fragile world together. But even in her loneliness, she never let herself become bitter. She believed in choosing grace, even when grace wasn't returned. At Monarch and Wells, Arlena often arrived before the sun even touched the skyline. She would tie her hair back, swipe her security card, and start her rounds while the building was still breathing softly in sleep. She had memorized the pattern of each hallway. She knew which coffee machine needed more attention. She learned to work quietly, efficiently, like a shadow that made no mess and left no trace. No one greeted her in the morning. No one asked her name. Most people looked right through her, eyes glued to phones or papers, as if her presence was a background detail. But she noticed everything. She watched people, their expressions, their posture, how they treated each other, and how they treated the staff they deemed beneath them. She always kept one sketchbook in her bag, hidden between her meal container and extra socks for Dorian. If she had 5 minutes between shifts or a rare quiet lunch break, she'd take it out, scribble something fast, then put it away. Her art hadn't faded. If anything, it had matured. Now her designs carried stories, pieces born from grief, responsibility, and hope. They weren't about trends. They were about survival. No one had seen her recent work, not even her siblings. It wasn't secrecy, it was protection, because dreams kept in silence are harder to tear down. Arlena knew how to smile without expecting anything back. Not long ago, one of the interns left a smoothie spilled across the conference table, berries staining the white wood like bruises. When she stepped in to clean it, 3 employees were still seated there. Mid-discussion, none paused. None moved their laptops. One of them even leaned back in his chair and let out a casual, "Make sure it doesn't smear." She nodded, cleaned around him. Quiet, focused, but inside, something ached. It wasn't the task. She'd cleaned far worse. It was the lack of basic human decency, how easily people looked through her like she was part of the furniture. That kind of dismissal didn't just sting. It settled, slowly, into your chest. It made you question if the world had assigned you a value without ever knowing your name. Of all the departments, marketing was the worst. Loud, self-congratulatory, and obsessed with image, they had their own ecosystem, and Arlena was not part of it. Their laughter felt sharp. Their conversations echoed down the halls with enough volume to exclude everyone who wasn't part of their tribe. And at the center of it all stood Kira. She walked like she owned the building. Hair always perfect. Phone always in hand. She didn't speak to people. She announced herself. Everything about her posture said, "I belong here. You don't." Kira had a habit of saying things loud enough to be overheard. Passive digs wrapped in sarcasm. "Still here, huh? Didn't know they let staff into this section during the day. Maybe one day you'll clean your way into the executive floor." It wasn't just mean. It was strategic. She knew exactly when to say it, who was around, and how to time her smirks with the snickers from coworkers. Arlena never reacted, not because she didn't feel it, but because her silence was a shield. She had children to raise, bills to pay, and dreams tucked in corners too sacred to be stained by cruelty. At home, Arlena was more than a big sister. She was everything. She helped Nyla with science projects late at night, running to the dollar store to get glitter glue or foam boards because it was due tomorrow and I forgot. She read coding blogs so she could help Dorian with his digital curiosity. When he started asking how websites were built, she found free tutorials online and watched them with him, even when she was exhausted. Nyla had recently started recording little videos, talking to a camera with boldness and spark. "We should start a vlog," she'd say. "Show the world what real family looks like." Arlena smiled but never agreed. The world hadn't been kind to her. Why invite it in? But watching her siblings grow, it was her reward. Every time Nyla laughed or Dorian figured out a new tool online, Arlena felt the cost of her sacrifice pay something back. They were thriving, and if they ever forgot how they got there, she would remind them, "You didn't do this alone. We built this together." The higher the floor, the colder the stairs. Executive suites were filled with polished floors, abstract art, and people who didn't smile unless it was for a deal. Arlena worked there too. Quietly, consistently. She replaced water bottles, dusted shelves filled with awards, and empty trash bins filled with discarded strategies. Once she caught a glimpse of a mood board left behind after a branding session. Pinned to the foam board were colors, cuts, and magazine clippings. Something about the lines and textures caught her attention. It was design, but not fashion. Still, it stirred the part of her that hadn't been spoken to in years. She smiled, just for a second. That world had once felt within reach. No matter how long she'd spent folding laundry or wiping down restrooms, Arlena never lost her sense of direction. She wasn't just working to survive. She was preparing her family to thrive. She often told herself at night, "Maybe I didn't finish school. Maybe I don't have a brand. But I've raised 2 kids who know what resilience looks like." She didn't feel ashamed of her job. What hurt wasn't the uniform. It was the way others used it to measure her worth. But she believed in long roads. She believed in small seeds planted quietly in hard soil. She believed that even if her name wasn't printed in lights, her story could still shine. It's easy to think strength looks loud, but Arlena taught a different lesson. That strength can live in quiet routine. That it can mop a floor before the sun rises, tie a child's shoelace with numb fingers, and still find the energy to whisper encouragement after a 12-hour shift. She moved through her life with purpose, even if no one noticed, especially when no one noticed. Some nights, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at a faded photo of her parents. Her mother's arms wrapped around her younger self, her father's hand resting on her shoulder. She'd whisper, "I'm doing my best," because sometimes that's all you can do, and sometimes that's everything, even when her back ached. Even when her feet throbbed, even when she overheard another insult from a passing employee who thought she couldn't hear, Arlena never answered with bitterness. She'd just smile. Keep moving. To many, that looked like defeat. But Arlena knew better. It was self-control, power, refined. She chose not to let the world harden her. She chose not to return what she was given. Instead, she kept her circles small. Her siblings, her sketches, her silence, those were her safe places. Each page in her sketchbook was more than lines. It was memory, movement, and meaning. One design was inspired by the curve of Nyla's curls, another by the folds of a supermarket receipt she crumpled while trying to stay under budget. The colors weren't just aesthetic, they were emotional. Warm golds for hope, deep blues for the grief she didn't speak aloud, earthy reds for the strength it took to show up every single day. She told herself, "One day, I'll sew again, even if it's just one dress, even if no one sees it." She didn't need fame. She just wanted to create, to reclaim a part of herself that hadn't died, just gone quiet. There was one place she rarely entered, the top floor. That was reserved for executives, people with thick folders and louder voices. But once a week, Arlena was assigned to that level for evening cleaning. It was always near empty by then. Just the sound of shoes clicking toward elevators, or an occasional phone call echoing through a cracked door. She liked it better that way. Quieter, safer. She could take her time. Let her thoughts breathe. That's where it would happen. That's where a door, just slightly ajar, would open to the next chapter of her life. But not yet. First, there was still work to do. One night she lingered near a window. From that height, the city didn't look chaotic. It looked organized, structured lights blinking like silent music. She thought about her future. Not in grand terms, but simple ones. Dorian finishing high school, Nyla going to college, maybe a small sewing space in the back corner of their apartment where she could teach them both what fabric can say when shaped with care. She smiled at the thought. That smile, the one she gave no one, the one that only bloomed when she was truly alone, was a glimpse of the woman inside. A woman not waiting to be rescued, not hoping for permission, just holding the line. They didn't know her name. But they would, not because she forced them to, but because eventually truth reveals itself, quietly, powerfully, in its own time. Arlena didn't need revenge. She didn't need applause. What she carried inside was stronger than anything Monarch and Wells had ever seen. And soon, someone would notice. Not because she begged to be seen, but because light doesn't beg, it just shines. Some offices thrive on collaboration. Monarch and Wells thrived on hierarchy. Everything at that company had an unspoken code: who spoke first in meetings, who got the best coffee, who used the executive elevator, and most of all, who was ignored. At the bottom of that invisible list sat Arlena Moore. She didn't need a name badge. People rarely addressed her. They saw the uniform and made assumptions that did all the talking. She was the woman who moved their trash bins, wiped their smudges, and somehow still existed outside their recognition. It wasn't just indifference. It was willful ignorance. The kind that happens when people choose not to see. Kira. That name carried weight on the 9th floor, head of marketing. Brilliant, loud, ruthless. She knew her power, and she didn't hide it. She could close a client pitch by lunch and cut someone down with a sentence by 2 p.m., and she had a habit. She targeted those who couldn't fight back, especially Arlena. It started small. Smirks, long glances that turned into whispers with her team. A hand gesture that said, "Move," without ever speaking. But as the months passed, it became sharper. "Try not to leave streaks on the windows this time," she'd say, walking past with her entourage. Another day, she looked at Arlena's cleaning cart and muttered, still pushing that thing around. "Thought you'd be promoted to vacuum lines by now." Laughter followed. Kira didn't yell. She didn't throw things. She simply turned kindness into a game and humiliation into performance. She was the kind of person who smiled while holding a blade. In an environment like Monarch, no one questioned her behavior. People laughed when Kira laughed. They stayed quiet when Arlena entered a room, phones suddenly absorbing their attention. Arlena cleaned the same floor every week, every shift, every day, without complaint. But repetition doesn't erase pain. It just tucks it away. Each sarcastic remark chipped at something tender inside her. Still, she said nothing, because saying something meant risking the one job she needed most. Because calling out cruelty doesn't always change things. Sometimes it only changes how deeply the cruelty cuts. What they mistook as submission was actually a decision. Arlena chose not to argue, not to react, not to beg for validation from people who handed none. She had bills to pay, a family to feed, a promise she made to herself years ago. Keep going, keep your head, keep your grace. So she swallowed the words she could have thrown back. Instead, she walked past the mockery and toward the conference rooms. Every door she opened, every surface she wiped, it wasn't just work. It was her way of taking control over something, anything, in a world that kept trying to strip her dignity. Still, even the strongest spirits have moments of weight. There were days when the laughter lingered too long, when Kira's tone cut deeper than usual, when Arlena walked into the restroom just in time to hear her name spoken like it was a punchline. "She probably thinks she's part of the team now," one voice said. "I heard she lingers just to hear our conversations," another added. Creepy. Laughter. More than one voice. Arlena stood frozen in the hallway. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. She turned, went back to her closet, sat down on the bench, pulled out a granola bar but couldn't bring herself to eat it. She wasn't hungry. She just needed quiet. But she showed up the next day. And the next, because her dignity didn't come from their approval. It came from what she built outside of those walls. From the science fair trophies on the bookshelf. From the way Nyla hugged her before bed and whispered, "You're the strongest person I know." From Dorian's excited ramble about how he was learning to code faster than the online tutor. They were her anchor, and because of them, she decided not to shrink, even in silence. Every day Arlena climbed the same staircase, rolled the same cart, past the same people who pretended not to see her. But what they didn't realize was that even stone cracks under pressure, and Arlena had been carrying far more than a mop and bucket. She wore her uniform like armor, her silence like a language only those with deep pain understand. And still, they poked, prodded, pushed. In the lunchroom, Kira laughed louder when Arlena entered. Her voice had a way of drawing attention like a spotlight, then weaponizing it. One afternoon, Kira stood with a few team members near the vending machines. As Arlena passed through to empty the bins, Kira's voice rang out with practiced cruelty. "Ladies, let's all take a moment to appreciate career stability. Some people just know their lane and stay in it. Don't you love that?" Snickers. Arlena didn't pause, didn't glance their way. But when she reached the hallway, she stopped, just for a second, took a breath, closed her eyes. Not because she was broken, because she was trying not to cry. In the back closet where supplies were kept, there was a small folding chair. No one ever came in there but her. That chair had held more weight than anyone knew. Arlena would sit for 5 minutes at the halfway point of her shift, drink lukewarm tea from a faded thermos. And sometimes, when the day had been especially hard, she'd open her sketchbook and let her pen speak what her lips couldn't. No one heard the pages turning. No one saw her eyes glisten. But it was in that quiet corner, surrounded by bleach bottles and rags, that she reminded herself she was more than what they saw. Kira had mastered the art of almost harmless cruelty. Her comments were never enough to be called out, just enough to leave bruises on the soul. "You missed a spot," she once said with a wink, pointing at a floor that gleamed. "Oh, don't mind her, she's on her break." Again, she joked when Arlena passed by. Every line was a jab wrapped in silk. And those around her, they laughed because it was easier, because calling it out meant taking a stand, and most people only stand when the floor is guaranteed not to shake. That night, Arlena packed Nyla's lunch while her sister danced around the kitchen, singing a song she'd made up. Dorian sat on the floor building something out of scrap electronics. The apartment was messy, alive, full of warmth. She paused. In this space, no one belittled her. No one questioned her worth. Here, she was not the janitor. She was everything. Her back still hurt. Her eyes were tired, but her love for them wrapped around her like armor. At Monarch and Wells, the culture didn't allow room for empathy. It was a place where image reigned and humility was mistaken for weakness. Arlena's quiet strength made people uncomfortable. She didn't gossip. She didn't plead. She didn't react. She just showed up. And people who can endure without lashing out, they're the ones others fear in silence. Because they don't play the game. And if you don't play, you can't be controlled. If you've ever had to hold your head high while being mistreated, if they ever swallowed your pride just to protect your peace, share this story. Someone else might need the strength you've learned the hard way. The 9th floor was noise and judgment. The 10th, silence. That top floor held a different energy. Fewer people, less movement, more control. It was reserved for those who made decisions, not the ones who carried them out. Arlena didn't have regular access there, but twice a month her schedule rotated, putting her on that floor during the late shift. When the glass walls reflected only the night sky and most executives had gone home, she preferred it, not because the offices were grander, but because the silence was kinder. No sideways glances, no remarks disguised as jokes. Just her mop, her breath, and something about that space made her feel almost free. That week had been harder than most. Dorian had come home with a fever. Nyla had a meltdown over a group project and refused to eat. The landlord mentioned raising rent next month. And Kira, she'd been on fire, throwing daily jabs like it was part of her job description. On Thursday, Kira accidentally knocked over her coffee onto the break room floor and loudly joked, "Don't worry, cleanup is part of the ambiance." No one laughed that time, but no one defended Arlena either. She just wiped the floor and walked out, her face unreadable. She wasn't angry. She was tired. Tired in a way only caregivers understand. Tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. That evening, while cleaning the top floor, Arlena paused outside an empty office. The walls were covered in design sketches, not fashion, product layouts, branding ideas, creative drafts. Still, the angles, the flow, the aesthetic, it all felt familiar. Not the type of work she'd once studied, but close enough to stir something in her chest. She stood a moment too long, just looking, just remembering. Her hand absent-mindedly moved across her notepad. She sketched a soft shape in the air with her finger, almost instinctively correcting the balance of a line on the display board. She caught herself, looked away. What was she doing? This wasn't her space. But something in her had stirred and wouldn't settle. The following day, Kira walked past her near the elevator, sipping a green smoothie. She didn't stop, just said, "Still here, huh?" It wasn't the worst thing she'd said, not by a mile, but something about the timing, the tone, the way Kira didn't even bother to slow down. It hit harder than usual. Arlena stood still. Her chest felt tight. Her hands felt heavier than the cart she pushed. There was no dramatic outburst, no tears, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when you've given everything you had and the world asks for more. That night, in the janitor's closet, Arlena didn't pull out her sketchbook. She just sat, quiet, hands folded. The room wasn't spinning. The walls weren't closing in, but everything felt muted. She stared at her gloves on the shelf, at the stack of folded rags, at the list of assigned floors clipped to the back of the door. It was the first time she truly wondered, is this all I'll ever be to them? Not to her siblings, not to herself. To them, the building, the firm, the culture that refused to look her in the eye. Would they ever see more? Would they even care? She didn't know it yet, but that question was about to be answered. And it would begin in the same quiet space she returned to every evening. Same floor, same cart, same rhythm. But soon, a door would open. A voice would respond. And the woman they thought they understood would leave them speechless. Not with defiance, not with revenge, but with grace. And with talent they had no idea they'd overlooked. The 10th floor was quiet again. It always was after 8 p.m., when the urgency drained from the walls and the last few department heads finally went home. Arlena preferred it this way. Empty rooms, distant city lights, clean silence. She worked differently up here. Slower, more careful. Not because she feared inspection, because it gave her time to breathe. That evening, something was different. As she pushed her cart toward the executive wing, she noticed a faint glow from one of the corner offices. Light spilled from under the door. It was almost 9 p.m. No one was ever here this late. Almost no one. She gently knocked. No answer. The door was cracked just enough for her to peek inside. There, slouched over a long table, was a man in a white shirt, sleeves rolled, collar open. The space around him was scattered with sketches, some torn, others balled up. His hair was tousled and his brow drawn tight as he scribbled a new line, only to immediately scratch it out. He let out a frustrated breath, stood, and ran his hand through his hair. Then, without a word, he dropped the pencil and leaned against the edge of the desk. The trash bin beside him was overflowing with discarded pages. Something was clearly wrong. Arlena paused. She could have turned around, gone back to her cart, pretended she never saw him. But something about the tension in his shoulders, the quiet failure in his eyes, it called to something familiar in her. She stepped forward, voice soft. "Excuse me, sir. May I say something?" He turned, startled. He clearly hadn't noticed anyone nearby. "Oh, sure." She walked slowly toward the table, glancing once at the open door, just in case she needed to retreat. Her eyes scanned the sketches. Minimalist cuts, sharp angles, uneven balance. Something was off, not technically, but emotionally. She picked up one sheet near the edge, tilting it toward the light. "These lines," she said, pointing gently, "they pull the eye too far right. It feels like the design wants to leave the page." He blinked. She continued, cautious but certain. "If you softened the curve here and textured this fold, it would anchor the composition. Draw the eye inward." A pause. He stared at her. Not in disbelief, in recognition. That's exactly what's missing. He stepped closer, picked up another sketch. "You've studied design?" "I was supposed to," she replied, careful not to reveal too much. "Plans changed." He nodded slowly, looking back at his work. It's rare that someone understands this kind of balance. Most people just glance and say it looks off without knowing why. Well, she smiled faintly, I guess I've had a lot of time to look at things that feel unbalanced. There was silence again, but not the awkward kind, the thoughtful kind, the kind that happens when two people are trying to understand something deeper about each other, about themselves. He pulled over another chair. Would you mind taking a look at a few others? Arlena hesitated. Her hands still smelled faintly of soap. Her shirt had a small smudge from wiping down the boardroom table. She didn't belong here, not in this office, not beside this man. But something in her chest answered before her brain could object. Sure. She sat. One by one he slid papers toward her. Some unfinished, some wrong in a way he couldn't explain, and one by one she spoke gently, offered thoughts, asked questions, showed him how intention lived in subtle choices. Her finger moved lightly across the page, tracing lines, not touching the paper, just hovering, as if outlining invisible energy. He watched her more than the sketches, not with judgment, with curiosity. 10 minutes became 30, then 45. Neither of them noticed. The room had no clock, and neither of them checked their phones. She leaned in to point at a layered edge. He adjusted the lighting. They exchanged a few thoughts that turned into deeper observations. What started as a design critique became something else. A quiet connection, not romantic, not forced, just human, like two people who had spent too long being misunderstood and were now finally speaking in a language they both knew by heart. There was something about the way she analyzed the sketches, not just with her eyes, but with her whole presence. Arlena didn't critique to impress. She spoke with a kind of calm authority that came from years of observing, adjusting, and surviving. It wasn't theory. It was instinct, and that made him curious. He leaned back, folding his arms. You know, most people tell me what they think I want to hear. You don't. She looked up. I've spent most of my life listening to people who only heard themselves. It teaches you not to waste words. He smiled, more to himself than to her. I'm Callan. She blinked, hesitated. Arlena. They shook hands, brief. But something passed between them. A mutual understanding that neither of them could name. Callan offered her a bottle of water from the office mini-fridge. She took it, awkward at first, unsure if she should linger. You're not like most people in this building, he said, almost too casually. That's because I don't belong in this building, she replied, half joking. Maybe the building's the one that doesn't belong to you. That line caught her off guard. She looked at him then, not just glanced, but looked, not at the shirt or the office or the sketches, at him. And for the first time, she noticed something beneath the calm demeanor. Tiredness, not the kind that comes from staying late, the kind that builds when you carry too much for too long. Maybe that's what made her feel safe with him. She still didn't know who he was. He hadn't said. To her, he could have been a stressed-out creative lead or a consultant called in to fix a failing project. His humility didn't match the typical executive arrogance she'd learned to dodge. Whatever his position, it didn't matter. He was kind. That was enough. He turned one of the sketches around and held it up to the light, considering her suggestion again. What made you walk in here tonight? He asked. She shrugged, eyes on the paper. I've spent years walking past rooms where I wasn't supposed to speak. I don't know. Something about tonight. You looked like you needed a second pair of eyes. I did, he said. But not just on the designs. There it was again. That quiet depth in his tone. Something unpolished, honest. He looked at her then. And for a brief second, the polished executive floor didn't matter. The titles, the roles, the lines people drew in invisible ink. All of it faded. They were just two people who had been running on empty. And maybe, in that still moment, each had offered the other a breath they didn't realize they needed. Eventually, Arlena glanced at her watch. I should finish my shift. He nodded, though his eyes said he could have sat there longer. Thanks for showing up. Most people don't. Thanks for listening. Most people don't. She gave a soft smile and turned toward the door. Just as she stepped out, he called after her. Same time tomorrow. She paused. We'll see. Then she disappeared into the hallway, cart rolling behind her, the hush of wheels the only sound. Back in her closet, Arlena leaned against the door, heart calm but full. She didn't blush, didn't gush. That wasn't her way. But something about that interaction had shifted her gravity. He saw her, not just physically, not just because she spoke up, but because, for a moment, she was allowed to be seen for who she truly was. And he was not who she thought he'd be. Whoever Callan really was, he wasn't like the others, and she hadn't even realized how deeply she'd been craving that difference. That night, she took out her sketchbook again, not to hide in it, to add to it. She redrew one of his flawed layouts, this time correcting the balance, softening the edges, and layering it with movement that felt alive. Then she wrote in small letters at the bottom, "Nothing changes until someone sees what others ignore." She closed the book, and for the first time in a long time she felt seen. After that night, something shifted. It wasn't a grand confession or some dramatic chase down a hallway. It was quieter, slower, more honest. Callan began showing up during Arlena's shifts, not every night, but often enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence. At first, he'd pretend to be reviewing sketches again, but the way his shoulders eased when she entered said otherwise. He looked forward to her presence, and Arlena, guarded but curious, began to let that door open, just slightly. They began sharing small rituals. He'd bring her a warm cup of tea, always in a plain white mug. She never asked for it. He never asked for thanks. It just appeared, steaming, fragrant, placed near her cart without a word. The first time it happened, she stared at it for a full minute before picking it up. "It's chamomile," he said from his desk, not looking up. "You looked like you needed something soft." She didn't smile outwardly, but something warm moved through her chest. Their talks weren't about surface things. They spoke of resilience, of pressure, of invisible battles. Arlena rarely talked about herself, but when she did, Callan listened with full attention. No interruptions, no impatience. Raising 2 kids. "You grow up fast," she once said, eyes distant. "There's no guide for that. You just figure it out." "I was raised by someone who believed love was earned," he replied. "So I tried to earn it in numbers, status, noise. I got good at things that never made me happy. So now I'm trying to listen to what matters." They looked at each other, not speaking. The silence felt rich, not empty. One night, Arlena stayed longer than usual in the break room. Her shift was nearly done, and the building was still. She opened her bag and pulled out a sketchbook she hadn't touched in weeks. She didn't know he was nearby. She thought she was alone. The pencil moved across the page like second nature. Curves, motion, angles, depth. Her hand moved fast, like it had been waiting for this moment. The design that took shape was a blend of structure and softness, form without forgetting feeling. Callan had paused near the door when he saw her. He didn't say a word. He just watched. Not as a CEO, not as a man, as someone watching a rare flower bloom in the dark. Later that night, while walking her out, Callan finally asked, "You still design?" She shrugged. "Sometimes. When I can. Why haven't you shown anyone?" Her response was quiet. "Because people like me don't get to ask for attention. We just try not to be in the way." He didn't respond, but his silence wasn't empty. It was full of respect. That night, Callan didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, flipping through his own company's submission guidelines for an upcoming fashion competition, an internal sponsorship project that allowed new designers to submit anonymously. He read the rules twice. Then, he opened his laptop. He knew it would be a risk. Submitting someone's work without telling them? That line could go either way. But something told him this mattered more than procedure. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about breaking silence. Callan didn't tell her. Instead, he waited until she left her sketchbook unattended for a moment during another break, just long enough for him to snap a few photos, careful, respectful, not touching anything more than a page. He spent hours formatting them, selecting the strongest entries, attaching her initials only. Then, with a breath he didn't realize he was holding, he clicked submit. It was a Wednesday. Nothing unusual in the morning. Same routine, same building, same shoes that squeaked slightly near the elevator. Arlena had just finished wiping down the break room counter when she spotted a small envelope tucked under her lunchbox. She froze. It had no name, just her initials, written in tight, even lettering across the front, and she glanced around. No one in sight. She opened it slowly, hands steady but unsure. Inside was a simple letter, printed, not handwritten, no fancy logos, just words. Congratulations. You've been selected as a finalist in the inaugural Emerging Creators Showcase, hosted in partnership with Monarch and Wells. Your designs stood out among hundreds. We were deeply moved by the emotion, the craftsmanship, and the unique voice present in your work. Finalist presentations will be held next Friday. We hope to see you there. EC Selection Committee Arlena read it twice, then a third time, and then she sat down. Her legs couldn't hold the weight of what just happened. Her hands trembled slightly. The words blurred, not from confusion but from something deeper. Shock, disbelief, fear, hope. She looked around, as if waiting for someone to jump out and say it was a mistake. But no one came. Her thoughts scattered. How? Who? When? She hadn't submitted anything. She hadn't even spoken about the competition aloud. Unless... Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Callan, she didn't know for sure. But the way he watched her sketch, the questions, the way he listened, it had to be him. But why wouldn't he say anything? That afternoon, Arlena couldn't focus. She spilled a water jug in the conference room, left her cart in the hallway longer than usual. She kept reaching for things that weren't there, but her heart wouldn't stop racing. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about being chosen. It was about being seen. Someone had looked at her work, not her job, not her uniform, and said, "This is worthy." That word echoed louder than the laughter she'd endured. Worthy. Do you believe hidden talent deserves a spotlight? If so, drop a heart in the comments. Sometimes all it takes is one open door for the world to finally see what's been shining in the shadows. That night, she tucked a letter into the back of her sketchbook. She didn't tell Nyla. Didn't tell Dorian. Not yet. It was too new, too fragile. But she did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out fabric samples she'd kept in a small shoebox beneath her bed. Swatches she used to study during her college days, each one tied to an idea she never got to finish. She ran her fingers across them, slowly, and then she picked up her pencil. Not to dream, to prepare. Callan didn't ask her about the letter. He could have, but he didn't want to take the moment from her. She hadn't said anything yet, and so he waited. They still met in the same way. Quiet corners, design chats, cups of tea. But she seemed different, more grounded, less guarded, like something inside her had straightened its spine. And that, more than any award or submission, was the reward he'd hoped for. The rest of the week passed with subtle energy shifts. Kira, oblivious to the letter, still tossed her barbed remarks. But Arlena no longer carried their weight. She didn't need to. Her world had cracked open just enough to let in a beam of something new. And though she hadn't told anyone yet, her steps felt steadier. Her silence didn't shrink her anymore. It lifted her. Because now, she was walking toward something. And that changes everything. The invitation arrived 2 days after the letter. It was printed on thick white paper, embossed in gold along the edges. No glitter, no exaggeration, just elegant weight, like it belonged to people with futures shaped by expectation, not survival. Arlena held it like it might shatter. The words were brief. Finalist presentation. Friday at 5 p.m. Location, Level 4, Monarch Pavilion. She read the location twice. Monarch, the same company whose break room she cleaned. The same name stitched on her ID badge. The night before the event, she sat at the edge of her bed, the invitation beside her, hands folded. She hadn't told Nyla or Dorian. She didn't know what to wear. She didn't know if she'd even go. It all felt surreal. This kind of opportunity didn't come to people like her. At least, that's what life had taught her so far. For a moment, her mind drifted. She was 19 again, sitting in a community college studio, sleeves rolled up, charcoal staining the tips of her fingers. Back then, professors praised her lines, her sense of motion, the way her designs felt alive. "You don't draw clothes," one instructor had said. "You draw emotion." She remembered that version of herself, bold, hopeful, convinced she'd one day walk backstage at her own show. Until the phone rang. Until everything changed. She opened her sketchbook, flipped to the latest page. One of her stronger designs. Flowing, grounded, born from struggle. A piece made to speak for her when words would fall short. She traced the edge of it with her fingertip. "Just show up," she whispered. That was the promise. Friday came. She didn't wear anything extravagant. A simple blue dress, the one she'd bought for Nyla's school awards night. Hair pulled back. Clean lines. No jewelry. She carried her portfolio close to her chest, each design a heartbeat she'd drawn during her loneliest nights. When she stepped into the Monarch Pavilion, the noise hit her first. Excited chatter, shoes on marble, laughter layered with confidence. Dozens of designers, some young, some seasoned, all dressed to be noticed. Arlena kept her eyes forward. She didn't need to be noticed. She just needed to be heard. She was moving through the main corridor when a voice, sharp, too familiar, cut through the noise. "Wait, is that—" She turned. Kira, standing beside two other Monarch employees, dressed in deep red, brows arched high, lips parted in disbelief. "What is she doing here?" Kira whispered, though not quietly enough. The other two exchanged glances. Maybe they needed someone to mop up afterward, one muttered under her breath. Laughter, subtle but pointed. Arlena said nothing. She simply held her portfolio tighter, lifted her chin, and walked past them. It took everything in her not to falter, but she didn't come here for their approval. She came because she earned this. The room for finalists was quiet. Each designer seated, reviewing their notes, adjusting hems, straightening posture. Arlena sat near the back. No stylist, no assistant, just her and her work. She didn't fidget, didn't check her phone. She closed her eyes, let her breathing slow. She was no longer the girl who hid her sketchbook. She was here now, and even if she was terrified, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing it. Names were called, one by one. Designers stepped forward, presented their work, answered a few questions, and sat down again. Some were confident. Others performed confidence. Arlena sat still, hands folded in her lap, until she heard, "Arlena Moore." She stood. No applause. Just the sound of paper rustling and chairs creaking as people turned. She stepped up to the display table and laid out her pieces. Each design was carefully mounted, pressed onto matte boards labeled with soft gray ink. No loud colors, no glitter, no distractions, just truth. Her collection was titled, "Worn to Rise." Each garment told a story. A structured coat representing the weight of duty. A fluid, asymmetrical dress that mirrored resilience through imbalance. A set of layered separates, stitched with raw edges left visible on. Purpose, because some scars don't need to be hidden to be beautiful. She didn't speak right away. She let the silence work. Then, calmly, she began. These designs weren't born from inspiration. They were born from responsibility, from silence, from choosing grace when the world gave me none. I've spent most of my adult life cleaning floors, not fashioning garments. But I never stopped creating, not because someone promised me a chance, but because I refused to forget who I was. Every thread in these pieces represents someone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to stay quiet. And then she stopped. No grand finale. No rehearsed bow. She simply looked at the judges and waited. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then a quiet voice among the judges leaned toward the others. "She made these without a team." Another murmured, "Her technique. Look at that pleating." One leaned back, clearly moved. "There's soul in this." Kira sat stiff in her chair in the back row, jaw tight, eyes locked on Arlena like she didn't recognize her. Because she didn't. She'd only known the woman who mopped floors, not the woman who could silence a room without raising her voice. Arlena didn't win. A seasoned designer with corporate backing took first place. But when they announced her name as an honorable mention, the applause was louder than expected. When the event ended, she was approached not by reporters but by mentors. A woman from a fashion nonprofit offered her a one-on-one portfolio review. A well-known tailoring expert asked where she trained. And a young designer, barely 20, walked up to her and said, "Thank you. I didn't think people like us could be here." Arlena passed Kira on her way out. For once, Kira didn't speak, didn't roll her eyes, didn't laugh. She just watched, tight-lipped, pale-faced, silent. Arlena gave her a small, polite nod, not out of spite, but because that's what power looks like when you don't have to announce it. Arlena stood outside the building as the sky deepened above her. No one knew the weight she'd carried to get here. No one knew how many nights she spent drawing after midnight. No one knew how many times she'd walked past this same venue with her head down, never imagining she'd walk in with purpose. But now she had, and she would again, because she hadn't come here to win. She came here to show up, and she did. The envelope was slimmer this time, tucked into her locker at work. No return label, just her name in clean black print on thick ivory paper. Inside, the message was simple. You are cordially invited to attend the Monarch and Wells annual recognition evening. Location, Monarch Ballroom. Time, 7 p.m. Formal attire required. Guests encouraged to bring their story. The final line made her pause. Guests encouraged to bring their story. Her first instinct was to throw the invitation away. She had already walked into one room that month where people hadn't expected her. She wasn't sure she could do it again. This wasn't just any event. This was Monarch's inner circle. Their cleanest shoes, loudest laughs, finest wine. The night when people clinked glasses for achievements they claimed and titles they flaunted like armor. She imagined walking through that door, feeling the air shift, hearing the whispers return. Even after the fashion showcase, even after the quiet praise, part of her still felt like the janitor with a sketchbook in her bag. That night, Nyla found her sitting on the couch, invitation in her lap. You going? Probably not. Why? Arlena shrugged. I've had enough attention for the month. Nyla frowned. No. You're scared they'll laugh again. Arlena didn't answer. Let them laugh, Nyla continued, folding her arms. That's what people do when someone shines without asking for permission. Arlena smiled faintly. You've been listening to my talks too much. Nope. I've been watching you. My whole life. Silence. They don't get to decide when you're ready. You do. Arlena looked at her. So, go, and shine anyway. She didn't go shopping. She pulled out the same dress from the competition, pressed it with care, swapped the shoes for something more comfortable, flats instead of heels. She pinned her hair with a clip Nyla had made from a broken necklace. She didn't go to impress. She went to show up, not as the version of herself they once ignored, but the version that had never stopped existing, just waiting to be noticed. The ballroom was already buzzing when she arrived. Lights low, music soft, servers weaving through gold-lit tables with trays balanced like choreography. The doors loomed tall, flanked by staff with clipboards and practiced smiles. As Arlena entered, a few heads turned. Recognition flickered. Some faces looked surprised, others unreadable. She kept walking. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she kept her chin level. Nyla's voice echoed in her mind. Shine anyway. Kira was already there, draped in silver, cocktail in hand, her laugh louder than necessary. She spotted Arlena and paused mid-sip. Then, with perfect timing, she stepped closer. Oh good. You made it, Kira said, faux warm. I was wondering if they needed help with cleanup tonight. Arlena didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't bite. She simply replied, no need, the real mess will clean itself up, and walked away. Kira's smile faltered. Just a flicker, but it was enough. Callan watched the exchange from the far end of the room. He'd been searching for her since the doors opened. And there she was, simple, poised, radiant without effort. Not because of the dress, not because of anything external, because she was herself in a room full of performance. He stepped forward. Callan approached with calm steps, stopping just close enough for Arlena to feel his presence. She turned, surprised. He smiled gently. You invited me, she replied. I hoped you would. But I wasn't sure. She glanced around the room. I wasn't either. There was a beat of silence between them. Then Callan offered his arm. Come walk with me. She took it. As they moved together through the hall, conversation began to shift. Some guests paused mid-sentence. Others nudged their neighbors. Not because of the man with her, most knew who Callan was, but because of the woman at his side. There was no announcement, no fanfare, just two people sharing space, comfortably, naturally, and yet it changed the temperature of the room. Kira's eyes locked onto them as they passed. She blinked, slow and stunned. Callan didn't look her way, but Arlena did. Not to gloat, not to prove anything, just to say, I'm still standing, and that was enough. As the evening transitioned into speeches, toasts, and end-of-year recognitions, Callan stood near the front with Arlena quietly beside him. He gave no speech. He didn't take the mic. Instead, he turned to her, right there in the glow of the chandeliers, and said softly, "You reminded me what passion looks like." She tilted her head, confused. "You believed in beauty when all I saw was brokenness." He took her hands in his. "You listened when I didn't have answers. You showed me that purpose doesn't always wear a title." Then, he lowered himself to one knee. Time paused. Gasps echoed softly. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations dissolved mid-word. Arlena stood frozen, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her palms. Callan looked up at her with complete clarity in his voice. "I don't want a future built on image. I want one built on truth. And you, Arlena, are the truest person I've ever met. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught, not because she had doubted his sincerity, but because never in her wildest hidden sketches had she imagined this. This moment, this question, in this building, the same one that once erased her. She didn't cry. She didn't make a speech. She simply nodded once and whispered, "Yes." The word rang louder than the applause that followed. People rose. They clapped, some out of joy, some out of shock, but most because something real had just happened in front of them, and they couldn't ignore it. If this moment moved you, if you believe dignity, grace, and quiet strength still matter in this world, pause right now and hit the like button. Let's show the world that good hearts still win. Callan stood and embraced her, not possessively, not for show, but with peace, like he'd finally found home. He turned toward the crowd. "She's the most talented person in this building," he said clearly. There were no objections, no laughter. Even the ones who once scoffed remained quiet. Respect doesn't need a stage. It needs a moment. And this was hers. As the crowd returned to their seats and the evening went on, Arlena stood near a balcony, breathing in the city lights. She didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel like the girl cleaning corners others walked past. She felt whole, not because of the ring, not because of the applause, but because she had walked through fire and refused to burn bitter. The morning after the proposal, Arlena woke up before the sun, not out of habit, out of peace. For the first time in years, there was no weight on her chest, no pressure to prove, to shrink, to avoid being seen. She made tea slowly, opened the window, watched Nyla stir from her room and Dorian shuffle in, yawning, laptop still clutched in his arms. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet she used to survive. This was the kind you get after a storm passes and everything smells like something new. Later that week, she walked into a shared studio space downtown. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers. A corner table, a few racks, a large window that let in more light than she knew what to do with. Callan had offered to fund something bigger. She politely refused. "I want to build it with the hands that kept me standing," she said. Slow, steady, mine. She called her label More Than Thread. Each collection would carry meaning, stories sewn into seams, strength woven into form. No fluff, no trends, just pieces that wore their purpose proudly. Dorian, now 11 and already obsessed with digital design, insisted on building her website. "No templates," he said firmly. "You need something that feels like you. Custom." For 2 weeks, he worked beside her in the evenings. Code on one screen, sketches on another. He created animations that moved like fabric, menus that flowed instead of clicked. He even embedded a feature where visitors could sponsor a stitch, donate to help fund. Designs for women from underserved backgrounds who couldn't afford custom pieces. "It's not just about selling clothes," he said. "It's about sharing your voice." Nyla launched a vlog series on her tablet called The Real More Story. It started as short clips, Arlena organizing fabrics, talking about patterns, laughing with Dorian over spilled buttons. But it quickly turned into something bigger. She recorded behind-the-scenes videos of fittings, documented Arlena's process, captured raw moments where Arlena talked about fear, perseverance, and dignity. Her second video, titled From Mops to Models, reached over 80,000 views in a week. In the comments, people weren't just impressed, they were grateful. "She reminds me of my mother. I've been stuck in a job for 10 years. I needed to see this. I've never cried watching a sewing machine before." People who once passed Arlena without a glance now stopped in stores just to tell her she inspired them. She didn't get swept up in the noise. She still took the bus, still helped Nyla with homework, still reminded Dorian to drink water and rest his eyes from the screen. But now, when she walked down the street, People looked at her like they knew. Not her resume, not her job title. Her. At Monarch, things shifted too. Not overnight, not all at once, but slowly. The janitorial staff began being greeted with eye contact. Emails were sent out requesting more respectful communication building-wide. Executive assistants began to leave handwritten thank you notes after events. It wasn't a revolution. It was respect. Unfolding. Kira, now noticeably quieter, passed Arlena once in the lobby. There was no smirk, no condescension, just a quiet nod. Arlena returned it, gracious, poised, complete. That was justice, not revenge. Change that didn't roar, but couldn't be ignored. They didn't rush to marry. They focused on building. He'd stop by the studio sometimes with lunch. No fanfare, just presence. He learned to listen more. She learned to let herself lean, just a little. He didn't try to rewrite her life. He simply asked to walk beside her in the next chapter. That was enough. One evening, Arlena stood at the window of her new space, sketchbook in hand, fabric swatches laid out across the table. Nyla was filming a vlog intro. Dorian was showing her how to upload product shots. They laughed. They worked. They dreamed. Together. She thought about her parents. She thought about every day she scrubbed coffee stains and ignored whispered insults. And she thought, if I had quit, none of this would have bloomed. Kindness is not weakness. Quiet is not absence. Sacrifice is not surrender. And sometimes the most powerful story is the one that grows from silence and chooses to speak. As Arlena's story closes, we're left with more than a proposal or a new brand. We're left with lessons. Lessons sewn into every line she spoke, every step she took, and every time she chose grace when silence would have been easier. These aren't just morals for the screen. They're truths for life. Let's walk through them, together. 1. Kindness is strength. Arlena never raised her voice. She didn't fight back with insults or chase applause. She showed up, stayed steady, and chose compassion over cruelty, again and again. Even when mocked, even when dismissed, even when her value was buried beneath uniforms and assumptions. Kindness wasn't her weakness. It was her edge. Because real strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks softly, carrying others without expecting to be carried in return. 2. Dreams can sleep but never die. Her sketchbook collected dust. Her fingers grew calloused from mops, not thread. But the dream never left. It waited, quietly, until one night, in a dimly lit room, she touched it again. And it responded. Sometimes life makes us press pause. But pause is not the same as delete. A dream put aside can still live, can still breathe, can still rise when the time is right. 3. Titles don't define value. She didn't have creative director under her name. She didn't wear a badge that impressed. Yet her presence commanded more than any corner office. She reminded us that value isn't tied to status or salary. It's found in the way we show up, the way we build others, the way we carry integrity when no one's watching. And sometimes, especially when no one's watching. 4. Real love sees beyond appearances. Callan didn't fall for flash. He didn't chase noise. He listened. He noticed the mind behind the silence, the talent beneath the humility. He saw her, not just for what she did, but for who she was. Real love doesn't check resumes. It pays attention to character. And when it shows up, it doesn't need permission to honor what the world ignored. 5. One believer is enough. All it took was one person, one heart open enough to see the gold buried beneath daily struggle. That moment when someone says, I see you, can ignite a whole future. You don't need 100 fans. You need one person willing to whisper, keep going. Sometimes that person is a friend. Sometimes it's a stranger. Sometimes it's you, speaking into your own life when no one else will. Now I want to hear from you. Which lesson hit home for you today? Was it Arlena's courage? Her kindness? The way she never asked for attention but earned respect anyway? Comment below and tell us your favorite part of Arlena's story. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring journeys from everyday heroes like you. There are millions of untold stories like this, stories that remind us we are more than what we do, what we wear, or where we come from. You never know. The next powerful story could be yours. Lord, may every viewer who feels hidden be reminded, you see them. You've placed light inside them that no cruelty can dim. May they rise in courage, walk in grace, and trust that their moment will come. Amen.